Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of the Athlete Podcast brought to you by Sports for Champions. We're happy today to have Winston Powell in. How you doing, Winston? You okay?
I'm doing good, yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. So Winston is a Team England gymnast. So talk to us a little bit about how you got into your sport of gymnastics.
I started when I was very young. I did preschool gymnastics because my mum and my sister were already in the gym and my sister was a bit older than me. So I started doing preschool gymnastics when I was like 1 or 2 years old. So I've literally been doing this my whole life. Stayed in the gym I was at in Bristol until I was 8, and then I moved to City Birmingham Gymnastics Club, which I've been at for 11 years now, ever since. And yeah, so I started doing mostly in club competitions, just a couple clubs like in a friendly competition together. But when I moved to Birmingham, it was more the national competition side of things, eventually moving on to the international side of things.
So talk about obviously preschool gymnastics. What sort of goes into that? Is that more just, you getting up and moving, or are you being taught any actual skills?
You're teaching 2 to 3-year-olds, so you're not going to get them doing many skills.
Yeah.
Certainly not going to get them on a bar or anything. So it's mostly just for fun, getting them on the floor. You put some soft play out on the floor and stuff like that. It's not too scheduled or anything, so it's purely just for fun, and it was just a good way into the sport, really.
Yeah. Okay, so growing up, obviously you mentioned you were doing gymnastics basically straight away. Any other sports that you enjoyed doing when you were younger?
I didn't really do many, beyond the age of 5 or 6. I must not have done anything other than gymnastics. I did a little bit of stagecoach, which isn't a sport, but I did that outside of school as well, and then I did a bit of kickboxing when I was really young. But for the most part, it's purely been gymnastics for me.
Yeah. So obviously as you're moving through the gymnastic ranks and things, was there any athletes that you looked up to, whether that be in gymnasts or in other sports? Were there any athletes that you sort of looked up at and said, yeah, that's my inspiration right there, they're the people I want to try and be essentially as I get older?
Yeah, mostly gymnasts, because I didn't really care about many other sports. I didn't do any other sports, so I mostly only really looked up to gymnasts. There was a couple. So when I was 7, we had the 2012 Olympic Games, and basically every gymnast there was one of my idols. So Dan Purvis, Christian Thomas, Dan Keatings, Lewis Smith, Max Whitlock, all of them lot. Getting the team bronze medal was insane, and I still look up to them to this day, even though none of them are gymnasts anymore. Because Max just quit. Yeah. So even with all that, I still look up to them. They're still incredible gymnasts in my eyes. But a bit later on, I'd say mostly gymnasts from my club. Joe Fraser is a big one for me. I've been training with him for 11 years, as long as I've been in City of Birmingham, because he's been there the whole time as well. And he's done some incredible stuff, and I've been in the gym with him for as long as he's been doing that, and it's just incredible to watch someone that amazing at the sport working day in, day out, and seeing what they do, and sort of trying to emulate it. He's one of the big ones for me. Yeah. Joe Fraser, and there have been a couple others, and being in that gym, everyone's so supportive, and everyone's a bit of a role model in some way. Even the guys that are younger than me, like Gabriel Langton, for instance, he's younger than me, but he's probably done more in the sport than I have, and I look up to him in a way. Yeah. But then I'm assuming he would also look up to me in a way because I'm older, and so we've all got different merits, and we look up to each other in different ways. So yeah,
absolutely. And so just touching back upon London 2012, because obviously you were obviously at the perfect age really, where you you were old enough to sort of know what was happening, and the Olympic Games, but then you're young enough that you could have went into sort of any sport. So there was a lot of talk in that time obviously about a legacy for the next generation and things. just how big of an impact did that Olympic Games, home Olympic Games, how much did that have on people your age?
Oh, it was enormous. Yeah. That Olympics is the one I remember the best.
Yeah.
Like more so than 2016, more so than 2020, because I guess I just remember it so fondly, and having that inspiration for so many different people, especially people who were my age back then when I was 7, like from a lot of ages really, and seeing those competitors, and most of which would have started about that sort of age, knowing that you could get into that sort of sport and be able to achieve what they've achieved is insane, and it's incredible, especially considering it was a home games and we did so well as a country.
Yeah, and I think that was a big thing, is it? There was, like I said before, there was a lot of talk about legacy and things, but I think people like you, other athletes from that era now, use a sort of proof of that legacy for now it's your time, obviously over the next 10 years or so. This is where you guys are going to move on and create your own legacy for the next generation, which obviously we'll hope you can do going into schools as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about school, because obviously you are going to be going into schools and doing events. So did you enjoy school? How was that experience for a young Winston Powell?
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit mixed for me, as it is probably with a bunch of athletes, honestly. I've had some experiences in school, most of them being trying to get out of school to get into the gym. So whether that be for competitions, extra training, all that sort of stuff. For a little period of time, for example, when I was back in Bristol, I was in school all the way until it would have been like the July of 2013 when I was 8. But I started in City of Birmingham in March 2013. So for like 4 months, I would finish school slightly early and drive an hour and a half to get to the gym, and then drive an hour and a half back. Well, I wouldn't be driving. My parents would be. But yeah, so that sort of puts into some sort of perspective that the gymnastics has always really been a priority for me, over any sort of school. It's been, like I said, up and down. I've had exams, as everyone does. I did A-levels last year, probably one of the most stressful times of my life, because I was trying to do the A-levels and had multiple competitions alongside it as well. So I had 2 competitions in France and the British Championships, all in and around the time of A-levels.
How do you manage to sort of balance your time there between obviously academics and then competing?
I don't know. I honestly don't know, because I guess you sort of find a way that works and just sort of do it. But looking back at it, I don't know how I got through that. Honestly, I have no idea. You just sort of adapt, I guess, and you find what works. But yeah, I mean, I was massively tired, because I'd had 8 flights in a week, because they're both connecting, even though they were both to France. It was awful.
I mean, to show that sort of commitment, I mean, even still, just doing your A-levels, you're still fairly young anyway, aren't you? So to show that commitment, obviously that can't have been easy. Were there any moments in there where you were, you started to waver a bit and thought, actually, I think something's got to give here?
A little bit, but it was more just I guess, fatigue of doing it for so long, and the A-level period was, it was a good few weeks, and towards the end of that I started I guess flagging and just sort of struggling to do as much as I did at the start, but in all fairness, my grades were good, so I must have done something right. But yeah, definitely towards the end I was struggling, because the amount of exams I had it was fairly sparse towards the beginning, but towards the end it was intense. And on especially one of my exams, I just felt like I was not ready at all. It wasn't like I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know the sort of process and everything, but It was more the fact that my brain wasn't in the right place on the day, which is a very important thing, and you don't really sort of think about that. It's more like, oh, I know what I'm doing, it's fine. But sometimes you just go blank. And you need to have done a little bit before that to sort of prepare yourself mentally.
The prep work,
Yeah, so there was one of those, but I mean, I did alright in that subject, so it was fine.
Yeah. Okay, so if we move into now, talk a little bit about your training, because obviously, so actually we move it. You've had an injury for the last sort of 12 months or so. Talk to us a little bit about that. So it was a broken ankle, is that right?
Yeah, so I got a broken ankle in the English Championships in very start of March this year, and then I've had a host of other injuries beyond that as well. So mostly it was just from March onwards that I've been injured, but it's affected every competition I've had this year, maybe other than the Welsh, which is just before. But yeah, broke my ankle in March, and then had 14 weeks between that and the British Team Championships, which I did quite recently, which I was not I was kind of half prepared for it, but I had 6 weeks in the cast and then 8 weeks until the competition. And normally our competition prep is 8 weeks long. Yeah. So even on the pieces I could do almost instantly, I wouldn't have been 100% fully prepared for it, even on like high bar, for example. But that wasn't really the main issue. I actually managed to do floor and vault, which wasn't the original intent. The original intent was to do 4 apparatus. I ended up doing 5. Weirdly enough, rings was the one I didn't do, because I had a really bad shoulder like the week of.
Right.
And yeah, it was a really tough competition, and it sort of taught me to maybe step back a bit if I've got an injury and don't work it, because I had a pretty good like a pretty high likelihood of re-injuring myself. On the ankle, because of the fact that I was doing floor and vault so soon after the injury. So yeah, I mean, lessons to be learned, I guess.
Oh yeah. So what? Obviously, you mentioned that you had 8 weeks. You had 6 weeks in the cast.
Yes.
Eight weeks after. What's the usual sort of rehab time for a broken ankle? Is that roughly the time you'd have, or was that a little bit shorter?
I was told that I would only start landing probably just basic landings 2 weeks before the competition. I ended up doing it maybe 4 weeks, 3 weeks before the competition.
Do you feel like your body was ready for that, or do you feel like a lot of it was you just pushing through that pain barrier, going, I want to get this done?
More the latter. Yeah, definitely more the latter, because I'm very used to pushing through pain. As a gymnast, we're all very used to pushing through pain. And sometimes it's hard to differentiate between a pain that's an injury and it's going to make it worse, and a pain that's just a niggle and you can push through it and it'll go away. There's a very distinct difference, but it's sometimes hard to know where the line is.
So do you find yourself sort of towing that line fairly often?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Because obviously we spoke to a few gymnasts, and they all say, gymnast careers are short, so you don't want to be missing at any time, really. Because you look at, a lot of gymnasts are done by the time they're 30. So obviously you've still got a while to go yet, but you don't want to miss time, do you? So sort of going through that pain barrier, sometimes I guess it is all right, but then you don't want to be doing it too often, like you said. So your typical training week. Talk to us a little bit about that. So what's your usual sort of breakdown of your days? What are you in the gym? Are you sort of out, doing skills? How is that broken down?
Okay, I guess it depends on what we're doing and whether we're injured or not. Because this year for me has been a lot less of what I'm about to discuss, because I've been so injured. So normally we would sort of change training around what the body needs. But normally, if we're fully fit, it will be get in and do a 15-minute warm-up or so, about 40-ish minutes of conditioning at the start of the session to sort of get our bodies ready and all that sort of stuff, but also to do a bit of like strength stuff, but more skill specific, so more gymnastic specific. And then we'll normally do 2 or 3 apparatus, take you to 3 hours post the start of training, then an hour break, and then come back in, do another 2.5 hours, ending in about another maybe 40 minutes of conditioning, like normal strength training, but more generalized rather than gymnastic specific. Stretch and then finish. But the vast majority of the training will be 45 up to maybe an hour of a specific apparatus, and on that apparatus we'll break it up to do specific skills on that apparatus. It can go up to maybe about half an hour per skill, but normally it'll be 15 or so minutes on it. For example, if I was to do parallel bars, I could do maybe 15 minutes on my above bars work. So you won't know what any of these skills are, but Diamondovs, Heelys, Makuts, all that sort of stuff. So it will be a variety of skills, but they will all cover above bars. But then I could also do upper arm work, so homers or front uprights stuff. And then I could also do underbars. So I could still be on the same apparatus but cover a lot more, which is why why the time varies so much. If you don't need to do as much, you might only need to do a half an hour apparatus, or maybe even 15 minutes. But if you've got a lot to do, you can spread it out over like at least an hour.
So obviously you're an all-rounder when it comes to gymnastics. How much does your training differ than some of the athletes who are just specialised in, for example, rings, and how different is that training?
I don't know hugely, because I don't train with any specific specialists.
Right.
All of the guys I know are all-rounders, but I've heard from some of the guys about like what Max does. Like I'm good friends with Danny Crouch and George Atkins and Alex Niskavenu, who train with Max at South Essex. And they sort of say that he'll be in for like an hour. He'll go in, do a pommel routine, maybe do a few bits on the other pieces, go home. Like, it's a lot shorter. And I mean, that's all he needs to do. Needed to do, I guess, because he's quit now. But it's when you're at that level and you know what you need to do and what your body needs to get where you need to go, you don't need to be in there for 6 hours.
And just top it up as you go.
It's more just staying fit rather than trying to get fit. That sort of logic.
Absolutely. Okay, so obviously you in your short career so far, you've obviously had some really good highs, and you've also had some sort of darker moments that you've mentioned about your injury and stuff. And there was also a time a couple of years ago where just after lockdown, you were obviously on the development squad, and then were sort of taken off that, but now obviously back on. Talk to us a little bit about what was that period of time like, because obviously everyone was going through a pretty difficult time, obviously with lockdown and things, and obviously yours was a little bit harder because you were going through turmoil in the gymnastics world as well. So what was that period of time like in your life?
Yeah, it was tough. So just before lockdown, I got the news that I wasn't going to be in the squad for the following year. So 2020, 2021, I wasn't in the GB squad. I didn't have a chance to get back in during 2020 because we were in lockdown all year, and I'd been in that specific GB squad for 5 years at that point. So like since I was 10 years old, and I was kicked out when I was 14. So like it was tough because I just sort of didn't really know a way forward, because that was realistically all I knew, because I was so young when I got in and I didn't really know any other way. So I like, it was almost like I felt like my life was over. Like in hindsight, it's a bit dramatic, but it's just sort
it's all
of
you'd ever known, isn't it?
It's all I'd ever known. So yeah, it was very tough, and I sort of had to look at it objectively and think I had like basically two options which involved me staying in the sport. One was that I could just sort of keep coasting and maybe get somewhere, maybe don't. It would be very unlikely. Or I could just take the opportunity I was given and run with it. And sort of that was the option I chose because I wanted to make myself something in the sport, make something of myself in the sport. And so that's sort of what got me through lockdown, the training side of things, because I couldn't see anyone, I couldn't go into the gym, so I had to get as fit as possible so that when I could get back into the gym, I could hit it as hard as I could and hopefully get back into the squad and hopefully get further as well. And so that's sort of what got me through that. And eventually in 2021 the first competition happened, British Championships 2021. Not my best comp, but it was definitely better than I'd had in a very long time. Not just because it was the first competition in 2 years. And I ended up placing 5th, getting into my first international and back into the GB squad, into the junior top squad at that point. So I guess it paid off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's a really good sort of lesson for not only young people, but just people in general. Like you had, like I said, you had two options. You could either just continue to plod along as you were doing, or you could really sort of, hone in on it. And you did that, and you got back to exactly where you wanted to be. Was it difficult to stay motivated in that time, obviously during lockdown and things, or were you so focused on this one goal that it didn't really matter to you?
It was very hard to stay motivated because there was no constant at that time. It was very uncertain.
Yeah.
Couldn't really figure out what was going to happen next. So it was sort of like, am I doing this for nothing? What's everyone else doing? Are they going to be better than me when I go back? All that sort of stuff. Always running through my head. And I mean, it still does.
Yeah.
Like, and everyone has wobbles. And even when you're the most driven in your life and the most focused you've been in your life, it's easy to sort of not feel 100% certain and maybe lose a bit of your motivation. But it's sort of reminding yourself why you're doing it and what you want to get out of it, and eventually it sort of comes back eventually, but it's not going to be overnight and it's not going to be immediate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way you spoke about that is exactly right. Like, there are sort of those stepping stones that you've got to hit throughout, and you had that one goal in mind, sort of you reached that goal. So I think that's brilliant. Okay, so talking now a little bit about competitions, because obviously you're back in there again now, obviously after the injury. So what does a usual competition day look like for you? Do you like to get up early? Do you like a little lie in? How do you attack them?
It depends quite a lot. It depends on when the competition is, first and foremost, and then also whether it's an international, whether I'm with my family, whether I'm with teammates.
Yeah.
So I guess that's sort of what determines what I'll do. But for the most part, I'll get up plenty early for the competition, at least a good few hours before the competition, depending on when it is, if it's quite early. Like I've had competitions at like 10 o'clock start, so I'll normally get up about 7 for those.
Yeah.
Something like that. But then if it's the afternoon, I might have a lie-in. Because, I mean, why not?
Do you prefer them ones rather than the morning? Yeah.
They're quite nice. I mean, I also don't mind the early ones because it's sort of getting out of the way and getting over and done with, because otherwise the pressure sort of builds in you and it's sort of this nervous energy, and sometimes when it builds up too much, it's quite hard to control. Yeah. Which is in essence what you end up needing to do, because when you've got so much energy, especially if you're going onto an apparatus like pommel, you can't really use it. You have to sort of push it down and stay as calm as possible, because one wrong move and you're off. But yeah, so, and then depending on whether I'm with teammates or with family, and whether it's an international or not, like when I was in Junior Worlds, I would go over to the other guy's room, just chill with them for a bit. But when I'm with like family, I like just sort of being in the choir on my own, listening to music or something.
What's your favourite music before an event? Any go-to playlist?
I don't really have one. It's just sort of anything.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not massively fussy. I've been told I have quite a bad music taste though,
Oh no.
so I'm not gonna.
We'll have to see who's in the Spotify rap for next year. So obviously you mentioned there about if you're with your teammates, you want to be fairly social and be with them, but then if you're with your family, you like to sort of sit back. Do you think that there's obviously pros and cons of both? Is there either one that you do prefer? Is there one way you actually, yeah, I do like speaking with a teammate, settles the nerves, or do you prefer just sort of, being on your own?
I'd say I guess it's quite hard, but I'd prefer to be with the teammates.
Yeah.
Because then I'm with the people I'm competing with, and I get to sort of talk with them, chat with them, and it's sort of a collective feeling, because otherwise you're just it's sort of you're on your own.
Yeah.
And it's not preparing you for the sort of competition. But when you're with your teammates, you're with the people you're literally about to compete with.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I'd prefer to be with my teammates, especially on like an international or something.
Yeah.
Like, I like going back to Junior Worlds. It was just the best competition I've had, and it was a great experience to be with them, and it was a great hotel too. So it's nice.
That's always a bonus. Okay, so just a couple of quick questions. Any children who obviously, say you go into a school and you do an event, and they say to you, I want to get into being a gymnast, what advice would you give them?
Try it. Why not? Because you never know if you're gonna like it. If you don't, you don't. But you never know when you're gonna find what you love, and when you do find it, it changes your life. Because when you've got that one thing that you love and you can always go back to, it just makes everything else easier. Like the amount of bad days I've had, and I can just go into the gym, change my mood. It's just a nice constant.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, and we'll finish on. So say 15 years down the line, Winston Powell's retired. What's one thing you want to be able to look back on and say, yeah, I achieved that? If there's only one thing you could pick, what do you want to make sure that you do? Very thought-provoking questions to finish off.
Definitely. I guess the ultimate goal, like the big thing that I guess everyone wants to do in the sport, is the Olympics. Because looking back, seeing that Olympic team from 2012, that's sort of what I want my legacy to be. Yeah. And having inspired so many people, that's sort of what I want to be. I'd say Olympics, but also achieving a good enough goal so that so many people can look at me and be inspired and follow in my footsteps.
I think that's a fantastic place to end. So thank you for watching today's episode. Thank you again to Winston Powell, and I will see you all next time.